Thank you, Mark. It's really exciting to hear about those upcoming publications that we can look forward to seeing. And thank you to everyone who came out today. It's great to see such a large crowd and such interest in this subject. Today I'm going to be speaking about Watson Library's experience with eBooks and just kind of give you an overview of how we approached the whole endeavor, some of our impressions of the collection that we've built over the course of the last year, and also just kind of briefly touch on some of our hopes as well as concerns for where art book publishing is going next and how that will affect libraries. The Watson Library is the central research library here at the Met, and our primary mission is to support the research activities of the museum staff. In addition, we are open to visiting researchers and from college age and above. And the goal of our library is to build the most comprehensive collection of print, manuscript, and electronic materials to support this kind of research, both now and in the future. So within the past year, eBrary has become part of our electronic materials mission, and we've begun to build a collection of individual titles on that platform. And I just want to mention that most of my slides today are actually screenshots from our eBrary collection, so you can get an idea of what it looks like. So I don't need to tell a group of librarians and publishers, that the art ebook world is very unstable right now. Ebook world in general, very unstable. And the options for libraries are not always the best, especially when you compare them to what's available to the individual consumer, that kind of difference in experience. And of course, coming from a research library perspective, there are the issues of ownership, digital rights management, and preservation that are very much unresolved. And then add art to that, and you're introducing a whole new set of concerns concerning copyright issues that might mean that an image is poorly reproduced or missing altogether. But although ebooks kind of feel new to us, the e-component of art history research isn't new. JSTOR is by far our most heavily used e-resource in the library. We logged about 80,000 searches last year. We have 200 current journal subscriptions that have some online component. About half of them are print and online, and the other half are just online only. And our library has subscribed to ebook collections such as the American Council of Learned Societies Humanity ebook collection and 18th century collections online for several years. And those two resources together add about 140,000 ebooks to our online catalog. And like many libraries, we have an active digitization program. At the reference desk, we're used to pointing people to Internet Archive and Google Books in cases if we're trying to locate something that might be out of copyright, so they can have it accessible immediately. And many of our researchers, if they're coming from a university, are used to having access to digitized repositories like HathiTrust. And for the most part, what we're seeing with these e-journals and e-books is a reproduction of the print version. In the best case scenarios, it's a nice high resolution scan, no restrictions on downloading, copying, or printing. And then we're also familiar with the less ideal scenarios, where there are bad scans, missing contents, limitations on what you can do with the files. But the ability to search these materials full text, the sort of immediacy of the access, the availability to access these resources outside of the library can usually outweigh or sometimes excuse away any of the issues that we might have with them. And we are used to working with vendors and publishers, both commercial and nonprofit, to host this kind of material. And we're usually subscribing to or licensing the content and sometimes paying a hosting fee or a maintenance fee on top of the subscription price. So when we began looking at options to acquire newly published ebooks, we encountered many similarities with what we were already familiar with, how the content is presented, in this kind of static format. We're dealing with models of hosting again and purchasing models that we're familiar with. And this is all in spite of the fact that an ebook doesn't have to look this way anymore. New models are emerging, and now we're seeing current ebooks and e-publications that are being designed to take advantage of the medium. And here are just a couple examples. There's the Online Scholarly Catalog Initiative, which is exploring moving the collection catalog online and developing format and standards. We heard Mark talk about what our institution is planning, and there's also a trend of art ebooks being developed for e-readers and devices that are geared more towards the individual and consumer market. And these look better than the books we're used to. They enhance the content rather than simply reproducing it. So while we recognize that there are some titles that will be tied up in these proprietary formats or perhaps available to individuals only, there are an increasing number of ebooks that are available to libraries as publishers release new titles and their backlist as ebooks. And while we recognize the limitations, now that we can compare them to other things especially, at the same time we can't ignore them. We're not yet at the tipping point where we need to pursue all art ebooks at all costs, but we did want to start experimenting with what is available to us. And this gives us a chance to develop selection criteria, test new models of acquisition, and gain experience working with this kind of material. And then later on down the line, gauge its effectiveness to our key constituencies. So we developed an approach to acquiring these titles that would balance our needs and our preferences with what was available and feasible to us. So as I mentioned before, we had experience working with ebook collections, and these, were meant to supplement in some ways our print acquisition program. In addition to the art titles that they provided, we also had access to titles that may be outside of our core collecting areas. But we were looking for a way to move outside of this model. The current collections that we saw offered by many platforms were very broad. I mean, we know that art e-publishing is pretty small to begin with, so art was usually packaged with some other subject, architecture, humanities. And we wanted to build a collection of individual titles that was based on our selection criteria rather than something that was just kind of packaged together. And when we're looking at ebooks, we're using pretty much the same criteria as we are for print. We look at the author, the publisher, scope, weigh that against the price, and with the ebooks we're able to preview the content before we purchase it. So that gives us an opportunity to check to make sure all the illustrations are there. And right now we are just focusing on newly published materials. And we've made the decision that we're going to purchase the title either in print or ebook and not duplicate that effort, not back up the ebook with a print version. And this decision means that there's another selection criteria that's kind of out of our control, and that's the timing of when we hear about new title notifications, when we receive the notifications that a title is being published. Because we purchase the title in the first format that we hear about, and while we can sometimes guess based on who the publisher is, if an ebook may come out later, we don't wait because there's no guarantee. And once we put in the order for print, we don't back it out once we hear that an ebook is available. And so since we're cherry picking titles from different publishers, we decided to go with an aggregator platform because we didn't want to have a situation of these titles being hosted on many different individual platforms, which of course introduces maintenance issues in addition to differing interfaces that require more instruction. And we picked eBrary after we ran an analysis of our titles against what they had and found that they carried the largest percentage. And we preferred their interface to the other platforms that we were looking at the time, and also many of our colleagues in academic libraries and art and design libraries have been using eBrary as well. We're not ruling out working with individual publisher platforms if there's a package or if they come out with a collection of titles that specifically meets our needs. And at this time, we don't want to host our own content. But of course, working with a third-party commercial platform means that there's an exchange for them taking care of all the licensing and copyright issues associated with this material. We have to accept their digital rights management, and there are limitations on the copying and printing and downloading with these titles. And it also introduces the muddy issues of ownership and preservation. When we purchase the eBrary title, we're buying the right to perpetual, irrevocable, worldwide, non-exclusive, royalty-free license to provide them to our patrons. And this is an uneasy compromise, especially for a research library, but it is a model that we are already familiar with many of our databases and e-journals. And we also wanted a way to incorporate this whole process into our existing workflows. One of our vendors, Yankee Book Publisher, YBP, already had an existing relationship with eBrary. So what we do now is they prepare weekly lists of ebook titles for us based on our selection profile. We review them and order them the same way that we do our print materials. As soon as the title is activated, which they take care of, we receive an email and complete the cataloging on our end. Since the number that we're selecting is still small per week, we copy catalog them locally rather than loading vendor records. So over the course of about a year, we've built our own collection of 70 individual titles from across 34 different publishers on subjects ranging from ancient Egypt to contemporary art. And kind of looking back over the collection that we've assembled, we see a few reference works where having the ability to search these materials full text, as well as make them universally accessible, is a real advantage. And most of the titles are very text-heavy. They're collected works, anthologies, biographies, a few theory titles. And these are titles that we would probably consider as candidates for sending to our offsite storage facility if we had purchased them in print. So the ebook version saves on storage costs and provides immediate access to the material. And we have also purchased a few books that have more heavily illustrated material, and for the most part they seem to look okay on the screen. We do encounter a few situations where an image that initially was meant to be spread over 2 pages is now chopped in 2, or some pixelation when you make the file larger on the screen. What's reassuring about the ebooks that we're purchasing now is that we could get them in print if we needed to. We don't need to purchase the ebook if it doesn't meet our selection criteria, if it's not acceptable to us. And if we purchase the print, we're not missing anything because the ebook version of it on eBrary will look the same as it does in the print. But of course, eBrary alone doesn't encompass all of the ebooks that are out there, and nor do all the other available aggregators and publishers combined. So if we encounter a situation where it's a one-off publication, as long as we can download it and save it, make it reconcile any kind of licensing issues with the publisher, get their permission to provide institutional access, it's not our ideal situation, but it is something that we can do. If it's an online publication that's freely available, as long as there's a stable URL, we could point to it from Watsonline or search for it at the point of need. Yet if it's an ebook or app that's been developed for a specific device, we don't currently have a way of capturing these. And it's unfortunate because these publications tend to be much more visually interesting and kind of designed with the needs of art and the researcher in mind. One example is a e-publication that the Met produced last year, and I'm glad to hear that some of the features of this are now going to be incorporated into the freely available online. But this was developed to accompany a Korean ceramics show, and video was embedded in this e-publication. You could spin the objects 360 degrees to get full views. And contrast that with some of our eBrary titles where interactivity kind of comes in the form of turning your head to the side or rotating your device in order to be able to see the image as it was initially meant to be seen. So we are doing what we can now to acquire the material that we feel works in the format that is feasible to us. And until the current options for libraries change, it doesn't really offer us a compelling reason to increase our investment in ebooks beyond our current pace. And I don't think we can expect all publishers to give their art ebooks this kind of treatment that we see with that museums and art publishers are now developing. But I'm hoping, and at least we're seeing, that there is this potential and there are opportunities to produce more interesting e-publications. And these are the kinds that we would like to see more of. And as soon as we have a way to provide access to them, we will. Thank you.